If you guys remember, on August 1st, Frost and Rivera, also known as the other Frost, resigned from Second Wind Group, citing that Nick Calandra was the problem, that Calandra operates in bad faith to serve his ego, and that in general the group lacks the attitude and processes to appropriately deal with inaction and inability to deliver the core capabilities of their role. So Nick Calandra was the bad guy, according to this statement. You can look, this is his official resignation from the group. That was August 1st. Shortly soon after that, he posted an update saying that he would be making a video essentially showing evidence of his allegations towards Nick Calandra being the problem. And this is juicy information, guys, because a lot of us right-wing grifters have been calling out Calandra for his internet behavior, you know, his culture wars on Twitter, his unprofessionalism, such as endorsing people, contacting people's wives, shutting down websites. He even made up pedo allegations about me. This guy is absolutely unhinged. It's nice to actually see a colleague and a coworker call out Nick Calandra for what he is, which is an extremely unprofessional person who deserves to be out of the gaming industry. Well, they posted just yesterday, and of course, on the busiest day that I had of the entire week, this would drop out. Foster Rivera says, as I was saying, a lot of stuff came up on Nick. Not my prettiest work, but my craziest dive so far. So now the video is out, and it has a lot of screenshots showing evidence of the allegations. Bear with me. It does go pretty fast at some time, so we'll be trying to post and pause and give my reactions to it. It's a 23-minute video. I'm going to leave a link down below in the description so you guys can watch it. It's called My Problems with Nick Calandra and Why I Believe He Shouldn't Work in Games Media. Again, this isn't Grums, me, Smash JT, you name it, calling him out on his behavior. This is an actual person that worked with Nick Calandra, one of the top creators on the Second Wind website, who's fed up with his toxic behavior. This guy literally makes hostile work environments, and this is karma coming to collect, guys. This isn't a good look for Second Wind. Let's watch.
This video is not meant for mass appeal. It is meant to inform the SWG community and the developers and games media members who supported us along the way. That would include the 18,000 or so Patreon members and the over 400,000 YouTube subs and anyone else who has ever associated with us as a group. I feel we owe a lot of our success to you, and you are entitled to know how things went down. As such, this video will assume you are somewhat in the know of who we are and who I am. If you don't, well, what a strange way to meet. I promise my production value is not this non-existent normally. The intended outline of this video will start with the prefacing two hang-ups people might have. One being, if Nick is so bad, then why did everyone resign with him? Two, is this some kind of alt-right grift? Then I'm going to go into my problems with Nick and SWG leading up to my resignation, followed by what I found out about Nick after my resignation.
So, interested enough, he has to address number 2 bullet point, because these guys that are involved with Nick Calandra, a lot of them are like, oh, these guys are just grifters trying to besmirch my name and all this nonsense, all right? The word grifter I hate, because just like how the woke people say woke has lost its meaning, grift has lost its meaning. Grift to me means that, oh, you're outside of my echo chamber. I'm offended that you're not subscribing to the same woke ideologies that I am. Therefore, you're a racist bigot and a grifter because you're profiting off of it, right? Number 1 is a really good answer, because all these guys left the Escapist together. And you're going to see some stuff uncovered in this that really makes you think, especially in regards to the previous Gamergate, where a lot of journalists and people that were in the industry were constantly making backroom dealings for their benefit. There's a lot of stuff in here that shows that Nick Calandra had a lot of unethical practices behind the scenes that he wasn't letting the rest of Second Wind in on, which is why some of these guys finally saw him for what he was. So let's watch this.
The original video ended up much longer and convoluted than I expected, so I trimmed this one down to maintain more of the focus on Nick's behavior and separate SWG from his actions. There are more details and problems that went on at SWG, and that can be in its own video. Apologies if you don't like sequels. There are 2 details above all others that create a little cognitive dissonance, making it hard to believe negative criticism.
So this is when Nick Calandra and everybody basically left the Escapist.
Of Nick Calandra. If Nick is so bad, then why did the others resign in solidarity? That's not how it went down. It just looked better for the news. How it went down is I warned everyone we were going to be fired because the executives were tired of Nick overpromising, overspending, and underdelivering, and were offering me his job. He had driven up costs by over 70% since the start of the year and lost somewhere around 30.
This is all the stuff that Nick did at Escapist, driving up cost, and for, I guess, the better headline for the news, everybody left together is what he essentially said. But he's saying that's not the fact, that there was a whole bunch of issues that haven't been addressed properly. These screenshots are going exactly like super fast.
To 60,000 per month on YouTube side alone and getting worse. Only 3 people got to resign from the Escapist video team, myself and 2 others deemed profitable.
So he's saying only Yahtzee and himself were the ones considered profitable at Escapist.
Everyone else was fired. Yahtzee legally had to be the last to leave, so we wouldn't trigger a solicitation clause or no poaching clause. He wasn't poaching, but we didn't want to take any chances with whatever might be in his 15-year-old contract. Speaking for myself, there were a few hang-ups, but I liked the rest of the team, and Nick gave me a chance to get into the space to begin with, so I figured I could give him one as well. But now I've found out that even what I knew to be true at the time wasn't the full story. The rest of the team and I didn't know that Gamers was planning on sacking Nick and giving the rest of us creative freedom at the Escapist.
Wow. So he just came out and said he wasn't aware that they were going to give them creative freedom after firing Nick, that Nick Calandra was the one that was mostly in the target.
Nick threw a fit, said the Escapist would never be profitable. Yes, there would be layoffs because Nick went on a hiring spree and his Prima project failed spectacularly.
So he had this Prima Guides project that was going on. He's always had all these little side projects going on, which adds on to the idea that this dude doesn't have a focus on how to run an organization because he's always in for himself. But let's continue.
But the rest of us would get to do what we wanted with the channel. Essentially, Nick threw us under the bus due to his failure to deliver on what he promised. The second detail from the perspective of a vocal minority is that this is some kind of alt-right grift attack against Nick. No, Nick has slighted many people with all kinds of ideologies and political views. I, unlike Nick, am not really the type to give unsavory people on Twitter the time and attention, and trying to frame it as me standing with them as a distraction from the fact that the intent of this is to point out that Nick Calandra specifically is the worst type of person that can end up in games media. He's been highly unethical, and the unfortunate effects of this is the validity of everything that's been published under his tenure will now come into question. I traced it as far back as August 2017 when Nick did not publicly disclose that one of the studios he was making a documentary for had offered a minimum $4,000 investment to get his fan-funded Kickstarter across the line.
Wow, so a quid pro quo thing. Wow. Imagine that. Somebody that is super left-leaning, progressive, political activist cosplaying as a game journalist doing something quid pro quo. That sounds a lot like the original Gamergate.
Since then, he's been trying to make bigger and bolder moves. They just don't pan out how you'd expect them to, I suppose. Claims to stand up for workers, developers, creatives, and consumers, essentially branding himself and the crew as the change the games industry desperately needs.
You probably expect me to end this video by saying something like, it's social media, so none of this really matters anyway. People are going to play the game regardless because the vast majority don't care how something is made and just want to have fun. Well, alright, that's all true. But what's also true is that we at Second Wind and you, the person watching this right now, spend a lot of time thinking about online conversations like this, or otherwise you wouldn't be here. Maybe you'll end up having actual interesting discussions about things like AI, unions in the game industry, plagiarism, games media, oh, and my personal favorite, out-of-touch executives.
So he liked to push this whole gaming executives are out of touch, gaming executives are the ones that are unethical, gaming executives are all about the money, Second Wind's not going to be like that. He tried to push that this was a change for gamers to, better the gaming industry, which it turns out, according to Frost, it's a lie.
His actions, however, have been anything but noble. During my short time at the Escapist and at SWG, he attempted to steer content in a direction that validated his views and minimized criticism of his biases and underhandedly tried to micromanage every creative decision. He isolated, overworked, verbally attacked, and manipulated his coworkers. He blackballed developers that asked for game coverage one too many times for his liking, even though he set himself as the direct point of contact for the group, and was actively against the idea of us giving free shoutouts or small deals to small...
Damn, look, you can see all these. He brought receipts, dude. Look at all these screenshots. And again, I'm going to leave the link down below to this actual video for you guys to go and pause at your leisure so you can watch this, because I know this guy is talking and going extremely fast, a little too fast. But you can see he's wanting to be the main point of contact for the website, or for Second Wind. Instead of the actual Second Wind website being the point of contact and the review sources and the codes and everything being for the website as a whole, he wants to be the main point of contact.
Smaller devs who couldn't afford it. He would then try to funnel them back his way to bargain for paid consultations. All the while, he misrepresented audience feedback to exert his vision on the channel and misled the team and community about the cost of running a business in order to appeal to their sympathy and draw out more money from them. And all of this is so he can finally fulfill his creative vision, and when pressed on why he is paid as much as he is, he responds, "I've gotten accustomed to a certain lifestyle, and I have a mortgage to pay."
Wow. So this guy was giving himself $8,000 and said it's because he had become accustomed to a certain lifestyle. But we're the grifters, guys. The right-wingers that make all this content against him, we're the grifts. We're the grifters.
In 6 months, his business decisions, content strategy, and community management raised our costs, just our cost, from somewhere around $600,000 to a forecasted ballooning $1 million cost operation, and eroded our goodwill and income, which he leveraged to make more decisions. For clarification, I don't believe Nick intentionally tanked SWG's value. From what I could find and from my experience, Nick doesn't set out with the intent to fail, and is stubborn about using the same failed plan he's been using for the past 6 years. You can see on screen what is essentially Calandra's thumbprint across Gamementary, The Escapist, Prima, and now Second Wind. He's been made aware by others and myself that what he does doesn't work. It's the whole reason everyone was fired to begin with. He refuses to change his ways and actively sabotages anyone who tries to help him or notify the rest of the team.
So it's his way or the highway, basically, is what Frost is saying right here.
And while I do hold Nick 99% accountable for SWG's problems, the structure within SWG was unstable from the start and falling apart, and most of the times I butted heads was when I tried to slow things down to reevaluate our costs and stop the overspending instead of pushing more people to the Patreon and milking the community we already had to.
Frost, I would give one suggestion to Frost. You need to slow down when you talk, all right? Slow down when you talk. But your points are really good at this point.
Capitalize on the momentum. This is a team of...
So Nick wanted the Patreon to stay above 60K and the war chest above 200K. Plans grew more erratic as we slipped below 55K and then closer to 50. So they're definitely losing money on their Patreon, guys. And I think a lot of it has to do with Calandra's behavior, especially after this resignation was announced publicly.
Talented creatives who just wanted to make things. They didn't have the desire to get as involved with Nick's power grabs, and of the leads that routinely took charge, none of them were qualified to make business decisions or content strategy. SWG didn't choose Nick to lead, it's just no one else wanted it. Even I didn't want a lead role. Myself and 3 others are qualified to help, but saying so made us seem argumentative, defensive, and arrogant. The specific event that finally made me...
So anytime anybody offered help or offered to give suggestions, Nick Calandra took it as something against him. He got defensive. That's not a leader. You can see here's some of the charts with some more of the value, their value sat so they could make a better game plan. So I guess they, Frost made this to try to show suggestions on their strategy, their game plan, and I guess Calandra didn't like this.
You see there was no chance for change was when I asked one lead if they were afraid Yahtzee would leave if they kicked Nick out, and this lead said SWG would be fine without Yahtzee. The group would get to keep his salary, the money in the war chest, and that would buy them enough time to find their way again. This lead in particular encouraged an every man for themselves mindset from early on that led to strong arming within the group.
So red and purple are Yahtzee on that. Gray is him. Obviously, Yahtzee's the moneymaker, and then Frost was the other moneymaker. These guys were the ones churning the content out.
Was essentially the same conversation I had with the executives of Gamers back at the Escapist that convinced me to leave then as well. I don't believe someone like that who can't perceive value is the kind of person that should be appointing themselves as HR, evaluating people's worth in the company, firing people, and then issuing statements about how the problems are just the usual growing pains. For my part, I believe this had to be public-facing because I exhausted every other avenue, and I believe Nick Calandra's standards of conduct and how he drives SWG go against everything we claim to stand for as a business.
Exactly. Nick Calandra and the whole mantra that Second Wind had was contradicted by Nick Calandra himself and everything that he was about and his behavior and the way that he operated as the lead for Second Wind.
We're supposed to stand up for consumers, creatives, developers, workers, especially now when the industry looks so bleak. As far as I'm concerned, I believe Nick Calandra goes against the ideals he claims to uphold, misleads public perception, and actively profits from it. As part owner, employee at the time, and someone with a history of calling out these practices alongside Nick himself, I believe the right thing to do was to resign and inform the public. I did not leave because SWG refused to fire Nick. When I was asked if I'd leave if Nick stayed, I said I would continue to work in SWG to the best of my duties.
So Frost was still trying to make things work to the best of his abilities, like he said. He was still trying to make things work.
Problems continued after that. I did not leave because the head of sales was fired. I barely knew them, as we had both been kept in isolation, and Nick fed me lies blaming the head of sales for our problems. My resignation was written before they were fired on August 1st. Feel free to check whoever steps forward as the public representative for SWG, as details are kept vague. But now everything else I've found after my resignation that I'm about to get into is pointed solely at Nick Calandra.
So all of what we're about to see here is all of Nick's unethical behavior exposed.
It takes away any claim Nick might have of being unaware and unable to control himself. It also recontextualizes our history and fills in the gaps for a lot of questions I had. After I resigned, his former coworkers and bosses reached out to me with allegations of experiencing the same behavior and...
Dude, somebody literally warned him after resigning. Look at this. So he resigned and somebody said, quick tip, be mindful of Calandra potentially stalking your socials. He did that to me for close to a year. Anytime I said anything relating to Games Press work until I finally blocked him. Hopefully it doesn't happen to you as well. But yeah, it was super weird. And this comes off of Nick Calandra's stalking of Smash JT, Grums, even myself. Again, remember, Calandra made that tweet about me saying that I don't belong around children with my wrestling school or training women to be pro wrestlers because of how I speak about females. And even though I was giving my opinion about the dating pool as an adult, he tried to twist it around to me being a pedo for whatever reason. And my employment, my business partners were contacted because of it. Smash JT's website was shut down. Smash JT's wife was contacted about his behavior, and he was endorsing it over Kotaku Detected. He threw a triggered fit over that. And then not to mention, he's literally tried to dox Grums. This guy is unhinged.
And worse throughout the past 6 years and multiple outlets he's worked at. I made sure to find as many sources as I could to back up each claim, as well as do my due diligence to try and refute it. I've verified the credibility of each piece of evidence and each individual, and I've also gone the lengths to vet some of the people Nick himself pointed me towards. He was once again lying and trying to delegitimize people and their claims. I will show what I can, but a lot of sources were given in confidence due to fear of retaliation from Nick or any consequences that may come from speaking out in the industry. Here's what I found on top of the stuff I personally experienced already. In a few words, Nick Calandra has a history of highly unethical behavior.
So this is going on for at least 6 years, guys. This dude has been acting like a cancer to the gaming industry for 6 years.
In games media and just in general, including everything else I've mentioned so far, plus taking equipment and product meant for press and public.
So items given to press are intended to be used for coverage in the property of the outlet, not the person. So it's saying that he took a VR system intended for press as his own. And they said they would have been something around February 2018. The dev gave it to him with good intentions, but my thought was don't accept gifts from people you're covering, which we found out later was already done with the Kickstarter donation. So this is quid pro quo stuff where Nick Calandra is allegedly saying, you know, you scratch my back, I scratch yours to a lot of game devs and a lot of press, which is what the original problem of Gamergate was, guys.
Applications under the guise of coverage and keeping it for personal use. Based on evidence found, Nick seems to have been using his own personal Steam account as the main Steam account for each of his publications he's worked at for over the past 10 years.
Yeah, using his own personal Steam account as the account for the past 10 years for press codes.
Allowing hundreds of press codes for games to be funneled directly into his personal Steam account rather than that of any individual publication. They follow him where he goes.
And the problem with that is that he's working for publications, right?
Now back to the rest of the stuff. Offsetting his costs with income from other sources to mislead associates. Consistent overpromising, underspending, and underdelivering that put other people's jobs on the line when layoffs come through. Pushing for content that validated his own views and tastes while discouraging any content that took a stance against his own.
He made deals with PR and later pushed his staff for coverage without disclosing the nature of the deals 11 times. So I guess he was basically telling developers that he'll get his staff to do PR coverage, part of these backroom dealings, and he wouldn't give the his staff the details of the stuff.
On biases, prioritizing his own raises and money for his projects while holding back the upwards mobility of his coworkers and also prioritizing his publicity to the detriment of others. Cyberstalking his peers in the field to the point of making them uncomfortable, slandering, libeling, blackballing, and threatening to mobilize his audience.
This is ridiculous. Slandering former coworkers and stuff.
Against people in the games industry with the explicit intent to harm their careers. Creating hostility in the work environment by lying, manipulating, gaslighting, and isolating people who disagree with him or are shown to be more capable than him. trading positive press, positive reviews, and documentary opportunities without disclosing that publishers were paying for his trips, paying for the documentaries, and Nick was bargaining for future.
See, this right here is super. This is like exposure. To me, out of all the things, this is the worst. Trading positive coverage, or basically fighting off criticism, which is essentially what Alyssa Mercante did with her Sweet Baby Inc. Doesn't Do What You Think It Is article that helped kick off this new Gamergate. These guys do these, I guess, damage control pieces. They fight off, people actually giving criticism to games. And they make all these hit pieces on gamers, calling them grifters. They attack. You think of like all the behavior that Nick Calandra had recently against Smash JT. This makes sense. They literally run damage control and interference as part of these backroom dealings that they've had because these companies pay for stuff for them. The PR connections include gear, trips, paid documentaries. It's all quid pro quo stuff that's coming out.
Employment. This isn't stuff that happened only 6 years ago. This was happening while we were at SWG and Escapist and every other outlet he worked at for the past 6 years. Now, this part is going to sound personal, but it's relevant and sets up the next points. A lot of Nick's behavior comes from a sense of entitlement, feeling like he is owed stuff. But a lot of Nick's behavior also comes from resentment. He feels wronged by people in games media, and Nick holds grudges. The issue is that Nick also has a problem with perception. It creates this catch-22 where if Nick wrongs you and you stand up for yourself, then he feels he can retaliate. But if Nick wrongs you and you don't do anything, then he thinks you're holding it in and plotting your revenge.
See, this is schizophrenic right here on Nick Calandra's behalf. Super schizophrenic.
Which angers him, so he feels he can strike first. And anything can set him off. Important example here. For as long as I've known Nick, he hated this one specific individual with a passion, and what drove him up the walls was the way this person pretended to not know Nick. I reached out to this guy, and lo and behold, he actually didn't know who Nick was.
So Nick had this one-sided feud against somebody that claims they didn't know who he was. And you can see this right here. The man Nick hates the most doesn't know Nick exists. What a fucking self-felting by him. Look at this one-sided. He even says it's weird that he has this one-sided grudge. And you know what? I've seen this in a lot of unhinged people that just live and die on social media. I've had my fair share of trolls that have this weird, I guess, fan fiction that I'm out to get them, that I stalk them, that I follow them. This looks like the same problem that those trolls have, Nick Calandra has, when I really could give a fuck less, right? And it looks like this guy could give a fuck less as well.
You can check Twitter if Nick leaves this up by the time this goes through and see that he has never acknowledged Nick once, but Nick has tweeted at him. I went and double-checked with somebody else to make sure this guy really didn't know Nick, and he has given the exact same responses. He genuinely didn't know Nick. Nick's arch-nemesis wasn't pretending to not know him. He didn't know he even existed, and Nick was holding a one-sided grudge this entire time.
Psycho.
This set off some red flags, so I reached out to a few more people I knew Nick had problems with and found out that they also didn't know Nick or knew of Nick but didn't.
Some of Nick's grudges are based on his own perception. Some are based on his personal connections, churn, Gamergate, Gamergate 2. He may or may not believe in these things, but his actions were influenced by his personal connection. So friends who he's with. So like he defends Alyssa Mercante like a fucking good little white knight because it's a personal connection, essentially.
No, Nick was beefing with them. He also tried to delegitimize the head of sales with a message that appeared to be from a disgruntled employee of his prior to joining SWG, but that did not check out. I had enough on Nick already to know he was well aware of his actions and now being insincere. When I told him I was going to continue investigating the claims that popped up and allow him the chance to explain himself,
and a lot of this explains his behavior towards Grums too, guys. Grum derangement syndrome is a real thing.
Demeanor completely changed back to the Nick I knew, accusing me of acting out of malice with the sole intent of running him out of games media. I do feel Nick was willing to say anything I was willing to hear at the time to try and prevent me from going through with it. The moderator agreed that truth should come forward. Nick panicked and named people he believed had it in for him from his days at Gamumentary, saying they forced him into a meeting to assert ownership under false pretenses and that he offered
Nick is such a fucking slimeball.
them jobs when he sold the brand, and they turned him down.
If you run that, then I will do what I need to do.
Well, you run that, I will do what I need to do. So he basically said to Frost, if you run with your whole story that I'm not, a good person, that I'm not professional, that I need to be out of the games industry, he literally says, I will do what I need to do. That is a veiled fucking threat. That is a veiled fucking threat.
Sure. See, this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, like they pulled me into a meeting on false pretenses under the four of them, where they tried to basically assert their ownership on Gamumentary despite not having paid any of the taxes, despite not having paid any of the business expenses. There's some contract they sent you. I don't remember what I signed on that, but that whole thing ended ugly. But that was not like I did not screw them out of money in any form on that. I tried to get them full-time jobs. They didn't want it. Kyle, Bailey, Jake Theriot.
That was a lie at the time, as I have the written document of the intervention that was held, as well as the audio recording of the meeting in which they gave Nick plenty of warning and asked him if he wanted to continue.
A literal intervention for Nick Calandra. Like, this is a grown fucking man who's in charge of running video game websites, guys. This is a guy who's a quote-unquote leader, having to have interventions made on his behalf in a professional work environment. This guy doesn't know anything about being a professional. It seems like everything he fucking says and does is just some excuse and some attack on him. Fucking joke. Clown shoes, as I would say. Clown fucking shoes. Legitimate clown shoes.
Nick used to run a site called Only SP. It did okay, and then it didn't, so he sold it. He then tried again with Gamumentary. It was run on the hard work of volunteers, and at times staff members pitched in to cover costs. Needing funds, Nick launched a Kickstarter for $22,000. They made it, but only because Nick accepted a $4,000 investment from Outpost Games. Wow. Seems he has a history of cashing in on a community's goodwill, and also a history of unethically blending the lines between PR and journalism. He was trying to get into the PR business and has a journalism degree, so surely he knew the difference between PR and journalism and the ethics surrounding the two. Ever since then, Nick's been trading good press coverage and even reviews for favors, gifts, trips, and job opportunities.
Which is literally what Gamergate 1 was about. Quid pro quo stuff.
One such opportunity was when he sold Gamumentary to Enthusiast Gaming in exchange for documentaries and a salaried job opportunity for himself and no one else on the staff. Wow. The sale was propped up on his...
So he only took care of himself and didn't inform the rest of the staff.
Staff's hard work, and Nick used it to leverage a job for himself at Enthusiast Gaming. A group of 4 had a meeting with Nick to air out their grievances and work out their demands. They told him what the meeting was about, and he agreed to stay.
I will be asking him. I think I decided I'll read the thing with maybe a little bit of embellishment, probably not that much. And I'm not should I like ask after I finish that little paragraph?
Look how nervous this person is trying to address concerns to Nick.
Paragraph, like is this okay? Like, are you willing to listen?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And then we can continue on down. And then once we get past the issues and stuff, before we get to the demands, I just want to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, I agree.
If anything. Sorry if it seems like intervention-y. It doesn't. We don't mean for it to feel that way. We just wanted to basically have a meeting and talk about stuff. Are you down to listen?
Mm-hmm.
The grievances were sale of site without consulting staff and no transparency on the details of the deal. No clarity of vision with site or YouTube channel. Extreme amount of micromanaging. Complete control of the shoots, but he didn't have the knowledge or experience to perform the task correctly. Lack of transparency overall and making major decisions without discussing fully with executives. Disregard for the roles. Decisions or agreements reached in an executive or staff meetings are often disregarded or ignored soon after. Lack of respect of site members. The demands he agreed to, legally binding contracts concerning documentary rights, full transparency of the budget, clarification of roles, streamlined creative workflow, better organization surrounding docs, PR support for all content, but Nick would not under any circumstances agree to communicating business decisions with the team. Even if it wouldn't change anything about the decision, he chose to keep the team in the dark. According to him, they had no financial stake in the company whatsoever, even though he repeatedly promised pay, and it was the work of the volunteers that boosted Gamumentary's value to make a sale in the first place. Each one resigned during that meeting, and in the end, he didn't tell them how much the site was purchased for.
Like, I'm completely aware. I'm not saying you don't have a stake in the site. You've worked on the documentaries and all that, and I totally plan to compensate you guys for that. But those are not, the financial dealings of the site are mine and mine alone.
So, this dude's a scumbag. He literally is lying to them, hiding stuff. According to this, they said he promised compensation. his staff had paid for some expenses, but then he's saying the bills and everything and running the site was his own, and he had every right to make financial decisions on it, basically.
I think that's what we disagree with.
You can't. Literally my name is on the domain name. I pay the bills.
That's fine. We're not saying that necessarily.
I pay the taxes on the site.
It's that for
I handle all
morale to
the
improve
business
across the
operations of the site.
team, that cannot go forward. In order for us to feel like a team and not peasants in a kingdom, that process has to change.
The financial, that's not the business dealings of the site. The financials of the site are with me.
I think it's time for us to kind of come to a point in a way. I'm going to speak for myself here. There were things that I was hoping to get out of this meeting in terms of changes, agreed upon changes that we kind of went through, et cetera. And Nick, the truth is, I don't feel like there is enough change coming from you in terms of actually wanting to make the site better and own up to mistakes that have been made by you or by others or by all of us. And quite frankly, at this point, I'm out. I'm out of the website. I don't want to be part of this anymore if my effort and my work for more than a year, more than 30 plus pieces of content is not going to be appreciated. And
serious,
that
dude?
there's not going to be any changes going forward.
I ran OSP for 4 years, and people did a hell of a lot more work for me than you've done.
Wow. So automatically off the rebuttal of this guy resigning, Nick gets offensive. Defensive, I mean. Defensive says, I've worked with OSP for 4 years, and a lot of people did a hell of a lot more work than you did for me. After this guy just said he's been employed for a year, a part of that group, and he's resigning if things aren't changing. And Nick just downplays that guy's hard work. What a fucking piece of shit.
Okay,
I wouldn't be able to keep my cool on that. I wouldn't have been able to keep my cool. I would have cussed out Nick right then and there.
people.
One last question, just kind of a shot in the dark here. How much is Enthusiast paying for Gamumentary and the site as a whole?
I'm not telling you that.
God, what a scumbag.
Okay.
But after talking to Nick's former coworkers from various outlets, I continued to find threads and trends that led back to his Gamumentary days. Even the little things became big things. Example, Nick drew heavy criticism back when he made the Kingdom Come Deliverance documentary. The head of the company was a Gamergator and shared alt-right views. Nick approached this controversy purely from Warhorse Studios' angle without critically examining the director's stances, which some viewers thought was a bad call, causing Nick to argue with them. This felt inconsistent with Nick because I know he believes in asking the hard questions, having before ambushed people he was interviewing with uncomfortable questions the interviewee asked to be withheld beforehand. Nick trades good press coverage and holds back criticism in exchange for paid documentaries, trips, gear, and job opportunities, and a lot of his connections stem from his Gamumentary days. His staff at the time was not pleased when they found out. This recontextualized one of Nick's patterns of behavior. A lot of Nick's personal taste.
So it says there's a pattern lying about people who might have known about Nick's unethical behavior. Nick essentially laid the trail on himself for the past 6 years across multiple outlets. At the time of this video, we verified 11 games were influenced due to a back alley deal Nick had made.
And biases that he pushed on his staff for coverage or restricted them from criticizing led back to his PR connections. He was making deals behind the scenes without them knowing. I even found one where he threw in a positive review to sweeten the deal. All for flights, gifts, job favors, documentary opportunities, none disclosed.
All unethical.
That made us look at his odd social media addiction in a different light.
So you can see this is talking about his social media addiction now, how his behavior is online. This dude literally had to have an intervention and was even warned that he was close to being terminated because of his behavior online.
I also thought Nick flew off the handle, but something was off. Nick had already been made aware of his problem and vowed to be better back when he was tricked into publishing false evidence. He behaved himself, sort of, and was a bit more vague and defensive. Then he went on the attack almost out of nowhere until he embarrassed himself on a podcast, which I warned him about. He claims he stopped because he was threatened with termination.
Him and Stuttering Craig in July.
But that came after the fact that his apparent Lady Fair had sided with his arch nemesis, who once again pretended to not know that Nick existed. Keep in mind that Nick has a history of making relationships up and trying to be a knight in shining armor, so I wouldn't trust Nick's word that someone else motivated him. But now I know he had Twitter Blue during that time and was hiding it. If you don't know, Twitter Blue lets you get money from engagements. I remember that Nick found out how much money could be made from Twitter Blue on June 11. You can hide the blue check mark, but you can also tell someone has Twitter Blue because that's the only way to make posts that are longer than the 280 character limit. Nick was making money during his culture warring. All that outrage amounted to about 2 million engagements for a whopping $10. Twitter Blue cost $8 at base, so he tanked our reputation and made it harder to find sponsors for $2 Twitter dollars.
So he's basically calling out that once Nick found out he can make money off of Twitter Blue monetization, which is funny because people like Nick hate Elon Musk, but they'll sure make money off of him. That he basically was just purposely rage baiting and trying to get engagement.
Makes you wonder if it's less
and that he ruined the reputation of the website. I hope Nick sees that even though you put your thoughts and opinions are your own, you're still representing Second Wind as one of their top leads.
Embarrassing to admit to having a social media problem that draws in sympathy. Not saying he was tanking SWG's value and planning to sell it. I'm just noting that Nick has sold only SP, Gamumentary, and in his mind he facilitated the sale of Escapist. What incentive does this man have to not run a business into the ground when he knows he can just sell it off after the fact? Nick went on to Escapist magazine and somehow ended up as editor-in-chief. Talking to workers that were there before my time, Nick isolated a few of the content creators and lorded over them with his heavy-handed content direction. Say you wanted to cover your favorite game, well, Nick wouldn't greenlight or promote it until you covered one of his favorite games first, or one of his undisclosed connections. I can't state the games because it might reveal the creators, but he was getting bolder with the unethical quid pro quo. More documentary opportunities as well as gaming gear were coming up for Calandra. But Nick couldn't keep the video side in the green, so he used money from the editorial side to offset the losses, a major red flag that led to the parent company splitting the video side away from the rest of the site. Nick was on his own now, not doing well, and then gamers bought up Escapist magazine.
Wow. God. Words can't say enough about that.
This was around the time I showed up. I didn't see many red flags with Nick at the time, but man, did I have a bad time under gamers. He led me to believe it was his corporate bosses. He dangled a full-time contract over me for months and ignored his boss's attempts to promote me. He had me voice 60 videos for his Prima project where we assembly lined Lords of the Fallen guides to no success. He had me voice his Stratos videos and shorts. He wanted me to come up with yet another series and another series. All of this on top of my other duties. I was in big-time crunch mode and Nick was practically begging me to get him through the year because his bosses set unreal expectations. Turns out that was a lie.
Wow, so he was lying to Frost about the whole situation, blaming it on his bosses on his ass or something to get this project done.
Nick was the one who promised them $805,000 in 2024 from...
So Nick made a backroom dealing promising a certain amount of money and didn't tell Frost about it.
YouTube video side alone while we were losing 30 to 60K quarterly. Nick was all over the place and received numerous complaints of creating a hostile work environment. He demanded the contracts be rewritten so that everyone answered to him, and it created this strange back and forth where Nick and his boss were fighting over me until the CEO pulled me into a meeting. I didn't know who to believe at the time. Nick said everything was their fault. Gamers said it was Nick's fault. They finally gave me access to the analytics though, and I was happy to see that Nick or whoever set up the YouTube backend wasn't very good at it. Once we optimized it...
My question is, why was Frost holding on to this privately for so long? If this happened back with the Gamers website and this was something that's been ongoing.
A little, we could get more value per video and make the climb less daunting. But it did show me only Yahtzee and I were profitable. This is what let the executives finally...
So Yahtzee videos and streams make up 51.31% of revenue, 51.10% of output. Frost output provides 8.9% of revenue from 11.22 of output compared to non-Frost. So only Yachts and Frost were profitable for the website.
Try and cut Nick clean off. He had run out of excuses for why he couldn't grow a video series in a channel. He took their money and it was time to pay it back, but he wanted to play victim instead. Their plan was for a Nickless Escapist, one where the creators got to experiment and do what
So they were wanting to get rid of Nick.
They wanted with the channel. He angrily declared the Escapist would never be profitable and that set his boss off. But we didn't know that. The team wasn't going to be fired until Nick threw a temper tantrum. He would rather an outlet go up in flames with him in it than have it succeed without him.
Wow.
And that's how we ended up leaving, unaware that Nick was the cause of all of our problems.
So Nick set it up for everybody to fucking leave because he didn't want them to go on without him. What a fucking egomaniac.
Before we worked at SWG, though, I demanded to know whether he held me back from a promotion or if it was corporate. I wouldn't be mad, and I was fine with it if he used it to bargain for the full-time pay of the other staff members. He held firm that it wasn't him, and he'd go on to overspend, overpromise, overwork, underdeliver, and create a hostile workplace just as he had a Gamumentary and Escapist, while continuing to do back-alley deals with his PR connections where he traded positive coverage and dulled criticism in exchange for favors, job opportunities, and paid documentaries. That's as far as this one's going to go because all the remaining details expand on my problem with Nick plus SWG leading up to my resignation, and I felt it watered down the core focus of Nick's actions. If there are any questions pertaining to Nick, feel free to ask them in the comments or on Twitter, as I plan to do a live stream in a few days where I can answer any frequently asked questions. If you have anything to ask about SWG, feel free to ask those as well so I can better structure that video. You may have noticed this video is monetized, so there could be claim of my milking the drama for money. Those claims will come up no matter what I do. There's always a purity test, and the undeniable truth is that yes, speaking out against people like Nick has the side effect of bringing attention and money. I believe in the end it's about your main goal, how you get there, and what you do with the money that matters. I'd like to give back to the people that trusted SWG and me, and raise up developers, writers.
Yeah, so pretty interesting expose. Lots of stuff to digest here, guys. Again, if you guys want to go back and take a look at it, because he went pretty fast. But the main thing is that Nick Calandra makes a lot of deals with companies in exchange for favors, and he doesn't tell his staff. And he's been doing that for the better part of 6 years. He's been unethical as far as games journalism goes. And when he left Escapist, he wanted it to fail with everybody burning down in it. He didn't want it to continue without him, according to this. So, not a good look. Nick Calandra has been fucking exposed, and apparently there's a lot more people that are wanting to remain anonymous or that will come out eventually. He's going to do a live stream. Frost will be doing a live stream. So, it's actually quite interesting to see somebody that's not a right-wing grifter speak out against him, because we were labeled that we were just the unhinged stalkers, right? So, pretty interesting stuff to note here. What do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts down below.